Okay. The cogs are turning. Okay. So welcome everyone. Welcome to this evening. My name is Akasha Mitra, and we're carrying on our series of storytelling on a Thursday evening. So just welcoming people as they arrive. So do sort of announce yourselves. It'd be lovely to hear from you and maybe know where you're tuning in from, and maybe you could just say how you are as well, how you're getting on. Welcome everyone. Who do we have, Britta? Do we have anyone arriving? Just to say, it's myself and got Jay in the shrine room. We've got Britta in the shrine room as well, and they're helping out with the tech side of things. So we've got myself and a small team here. And then Suryagupta is going to join us in a little while as well. So she's going to be zooming in from home. And after I've set up the evening and welcomed everyone, we'll do a short meditation, and then we'll invite Suryagupta to join us. Yeah. Oh, lovely. So we've already got 20 people tuning in. That's lovely. Yeah. Is anyone saying hello? You're probably a little bit shy, so don't be shy. Let us know who you are and where you're tuning in from. Yeah. I always enjoy this part of the evening when I sort of tune in from home. It's always nice to see who's here, and even though we're not physically together in this space, you can have a sense of kind of who's here, and sometimes I see people I know, which is very nice. Yeah.
Yeah, so we have a few people
saying
hello. So there's Michelle Fox, Michelle and Sarah actually from Stoke Newington.
Lovely. Ah, lovely. Yeah, just up the road in Stoke Newington. Hi, Michelle and Sarah.
And then there's Ruby as well.
Okay, hello Ruby. Thanks for joining us.
And Debbie from West Wales.
Oh, lovely. Hi, Debbie. I'm half Welsh, so that makes the half Welshman in me happy.
And there's Kalpna Singh as well from West Norwood.
Lovely. Hi, Kalpna.
And there's Nina from New York.
Oh, great. Okay. Yeah. And sorry, her name was?
Nina.
Nina, that's right. Yeah, Nina, you've been tuning in pretty much the whole way through lockdown, haven't you? Which is really lovely. I think I was saying to you a while back when you tuned in, I lived in New York very briefly, and I was involved with the Sangha there. So it's New York's very close to my heart. So that's lovely that you've been able to keep tuning in, Nina. That's great. Lovely. Okay, so it's 8 o'clock, so we'll maybe give it another sort of minute or so and see who's joining us, and then we'll kind of start the evening. Yeah.
Yes, so we have Gurdeep from Port Talbot.
Oh, lovely, another Welshman. Hello, Gurdeep.
And then Darren from Peterborough.
Great, hello, Darren. Yeah.
And Mercia as well.
Lovely. Oh, welcome. Great. It's really nice that everyone is very, very welcome to the evening, but it's really nice that people have been tuning in regularly as well. It's given me a sort of a sense of a kind of virtual Sangha, which is really, really nice. So yeah, thanks for everyone who's tuning in. Yeah. Great. Okay, so we might make a start, and I'm sure people will keep on arriving, but welcome to everyone. So as I said, what we've been doing on Thursday evenings for the last few weeks is we've been telling stories from the Buddhist tradition and stories from the Buddha's life. So I was telling the story of Kisagotami last week. Some of you might have been here for that. And this evening, we've got Suryagupta, who is going to be telling the story of Nidhi. So she will say a little bit more about that later on. I'm really looking forward to that. It's a wonderful, wonderful story. And so we're looking at stories from the Buddha's life and exploring those really, and seeing, well, what can these stories tell us about our lives, and what sort of themes and what's prompted by those stories. So that's what we're doing this evening. And what we're going to do to start with is we're just going to have a period of meditation. So I'm going to lead us in a period of meditation. So if you set yourself up, we're not going to sit for very long. It's going to be probably about 10 minutes or 12 minutes or something like that. If you can get yourself into a position that's comfortable for you, so you can either sit on the floor, on some cushions, or even if you're just on the sofa or something like that, you can get into a position where you're prepared for meditation. So what you want to be looking for really is to have a nice straight back and to be in a position that's nice and comfortable for you. And Britta's just going to dim the lights for us. And we're going to sit for about 10 minutes or so. So I'll lead us through a period of meditation. So if you'd like to close your eyes. And just settling down into our bodies. And just sort of making a transition into a different way of being for this short period of time. It's a lovely way to start the class, because through meditating, what we're doing is we're entering a different space. We're entering a space where we're relaxed, but we're alert, and then we're receptive for the rest of the evening, ready to take in whatever happens in the rest of the evening. So just settling into our bodies. And you could start just by feeling the weight of your body on the chair or on the cushion or whatever it is that you're sat on. So just letting gravity do its thing and just feeling your body dropping down, feeling the weight of your body. And just noticing physical sensations. So you might notice that your mind is a little bit busy, you might have had a busy day. And you can just let thoughts go on, but you don't have to pay attention to them. So by paying attention to your physical experience, you can sort of take the power away from your busy mind. And maybe it will still be humming slightly in the background, but you don't need to fuel it by paying attention to it. You can pay attention to your body. And you can pay attention to the breath. So we're simplifying our experience by just paying attention to body and breath. So noticing that your body is breathing. So what does that mean? It means that your body will be expanding and contracting. You can feel that in your stomach, you can feel it in your chest. So just paying attention to that. You can feel the rising and falling of your shoulders. So you might even feel the breath in other parts of your body. You can feel the slight pull in your hands and your arms. And it's subtle, but you can feel the breath in the whole body. And then while paying attention to the breath, just notice where you're holding on. So there'll be some parts of the body where you're holding some kind of tension or you're not fully relaxing. So I'm noticing a little bit of tension in my shoulders. I'm not fully relaxed in my stomach area. So everybody's body is different, but just noticing if you're holding on anywhere, and you can just let go, just relax. You don't need to hold on anywhere. You don't need to hold a facial expression. Can you let your shoulders drop? Can you let your stomach relax? And then as you relax, just noticing the effect that that has on your breathing, on your body breathing. And if your mind starts to wander, you can just gently bring it back to the breath and bring it back to the physical sensations around the breath. So you might feel the breath through your nostrils, you can feel it in your throat. Feel the air entering and leaving your lungs. And just bringing the attention back there as many times as you need to. And if you notice that your mind is particularly busy, you can broaden out your awareness to your whole body. Or seeing if there's a particular part of your body that's asking for your attention. Feeling sensations in one particular part of the body, your hands or your knees. And just seeing if you can tune into that. So it's like you're deepening your experience of the breath and the body through paying attention. Choosing just to pay attention to that. So spending a few more moments in awareness. Seeing if you can contact a sense of appreciation But you're able to sit here, we're able to breathe clearly. Whatever else is going on at this moment, you're okay. So when you're ready, opening your eyes. Okay, lovely. So I'm going to hand over to Suryagupta now, who's going to do the next bit of the evening. So Suryagupta, it's over to you.
Hi there, Akasha Mitra. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for a very relaxing meditation.
Okay, so I'm not sure if we can hear you, Suryagupta.
Okay. Can you hear me? I think I'm unmuted. So I'm going to carry on until, is that all right? Yeah, lovely. Yeah. Thank you. So yes, thank you very much, Akasha Mitra, and to Jay and Britta, who's doing our tech this evening. And yeah, it was lovely meditation, Akasha Mitra, warming us all up. And yeah, my name's Suryagupta, and as Akasha Mitra said, we're going to be, the last few Thursdays we've been telling stories from the life of the Buddha, and particularly some of the characters that the Buddha met. And I personally love these stories. I learn a lot about Buddhism through these stories, because in a way it's through the Buddha's encounter with these characters that you see how the teachings impact on an actual person. So the Buddha did give lots of formal teachings to gatherings, but often he met people, he had various incidences, that he observed or was involved in, and it's through that he communicates, and he communicates very directly. You see how he just sees somebody's sort of individual situation, individual circumstance, their background. He just sees them completely, and is then able to deliver a teaching to them, and we see the impact. And that in itself is really important, because in a way the Dharma, the teachings, Buddhism doesn't become alive unless it's through individual lives, through my life, through your life, if you're practicing. And yeah, we learn about what Buddhism is. We learn about the teachings through the different ways it shows up. Yeah, that's in a way how you know the teachings are working, is that, well, how is it changing your experience of yourself or your environment or your relationship with other people? So I love these stories. And I also, with these stories, you also find out a little bit about the society as well at the time of the Buddha. And sometimes you get a sense of what the Buddha thought about society. Certainly, again, through his teachings you get, and through these encounters, people come with their situation, don't they? They come with their circumstances. They come with their challenges, and you get a sense of what the Buddha, in a way, what his position was on some aspects of society through how he teaches these people as well in their very different social circumstances. So the other thing to say, I guess, is going back to the teachings needing to come alive. They show us a bit about society. They show us about individuals and how the teachings land. And for me, I know that was really important, because some of the teachings can be quite abstract, at least how they're presented often. So one of the teachings I'm going to draw out today, well, actually, let's start with the teaching you drew out last week, Akasha Mitra. You drew out the teaching of impermanence, and that actually, that's that all things change. But the story was the teaching, the story was about a woman who lost her child, who was grief-stricken, sort of mad with grief, really. And the Buddha encounters her, really takes her in, really takes her social situation as well as her personal situation in, and then gives her a teaching. And it's through that we see the impact that she's able to let go of the grief. So that was impermanence. And tonight, the teaching I'm going to draw out is one called the Teaching of Conditionality. So all things arise in dependence upon conditions and cease when those conditions cease. I remember when I heard that teaching for the first time, I thought, well, that's interesting, that makes sense, but it didn't particularly touch me. I found it quite abstract. I couldn't really see how it would relate to my actual life and the things that were going on in my life. And again, I began to understand it through obviously reflecting on my actual life experience, and obviously listening to these different kind of stories that also brought that out as well. So this is the teaching, one of the teachings anyway, that this story probably brings out. So let's get going. The story is about Nidhi. And so with Nidhi, he wakes up one day, just jump right in. So he wakes up, and he wakes up full of joy. He wakes up even bliss, which is a completely rare experience for Nidhi. That's not how he normally wakes up. So he wakes up full of joy, full of bliss. He's dreamt of the Buddha. He's dreamt that the Buddha is coming to his village. So as I'm telling the story, I'd invite you to really see how it lands, see what impact it has on you, see if there's any personal resonances for me. I particularly like this story because I had a very personal resonance for me. It's felt that it sort of related to my circumstances growing up, even though it's probably much more dramatic and more extreme. So as I'm telling it, do sort of see if you can step into the shoes or see what relevance it might have for you. So yes, he wakes up and he's full of joy, he's full of bliss, and he's dreamt of the Buddha, and he's dreamt that the Buddha is coming to his village. And in a way, he dreamt of that because the day before, as he was doing his rounds, as he was, scurrying through the streets, overhearing crowd upon crowd, group upon group, household upon household, he heard people talking about the Buddha, and he could see how lit up they were. He could see how excited they were. They kept saying, what a blessing, what a gift. The enlightened one is coming to this village, this very village. So Nidhi hears that, and by this time the Buddha, he's been teaching for a number of years. His fame has spread, and he's had a huge impact on the whole of Indian society. But he teaches by walking around. That's how he taught. He just walked from place to place barefoot, and he had many followers at this time. But to actually meet the Buddha, it would have been a rare occurrence. It probably would have been like, I don't know, winning the lottery or something like that, something rare to actually meet the person. You might have heard about them. You might have even, if you're fortunate, met a follower of the Buddha, but to actually meet the Buddha would have been rare. So when Nidhi hears this, he too is really excited, and he goes to bed just full of this, dreams about it, and wakes up with that fully in his mind. And the word Buddha means the awakened one, enlightened one. And it would have been known by now as well that meeting the Buddha would change people's lives. Even meeting disciples of the Buddha would change people's lives. They were able to find ways of freedom. He was, although there's been many enlightened beings, the historical Buddha was the first person to detail the path. And they say meeting the actual Buddha was like, a sun walking, a sun bright in the sky. It would just transform the environment, transform the experience you'd be having, apparently, for many, many people. So Nidhi is impacted in it, like others, with this knowledge that the Buddha's coming, and he gets very excited and yeah, goes to bed full of it, wakes up full of it, and begins to imagine what it'd be like meeting the Buddha, begins to imagine what it'd be like meeting this sun-like figure, meeting this figure of warmth and energy, begins to imagine what it'd be like receiving a teaching that would help him unlock his suffering, the suffering he experiences from others, hatred, ignorance, prejudice, bias, the suffering that he feels in himself, resentment, anger, despondency, just actually unlocking for him the suffering of his social conditions. That's what he imagines as he's imagining the Buddha, and he imagines a world without any of those things, and he feels great until that slowly changes. It gradually dawns on him, a bit like, when you, I don't know if you had this, when you wake up and you feel great and suddenly you remember something not great that happened the day before, or something you've got to do that day, and your heart sinks. For Nidhi, that was 100 times that, because he realized, 1,000 times that maybe, because he realized that whilst he was imagining the Buddha, whilst he was imagining this sense of freedom and meeting this sun-like figure, a very rare occurrence, that he himself would not be allowed to be anywhere near the Buddha. He himself would not even be allowed to be near the crowds meeting the Buddha. And what occurs to him instead of this joy, the joy gradually fades, and what's there instead is this deep disappointment, a remembrance, remembering, of his situation, deep disappointment. Fear also begins to dawn on him, dread. And this is because Nidhi has been cast out. He's been cast out by society. Nidhi is, there was a caste system in India. There still is a caste system in India. And in those days, it was deeply rigid. It's still very rigid, but then perhaps even more so. But it's deeply rigid caste system, whereby there's basically a graded inequality, graded system of social inequality. And those at the top, born into it, would get all the privileges, and those at the bottom would not have any real opportunities. And Nidhi's position on this sort of rung, if you like, of this ladder was so low that he was not even on the ladder. He was even not even scheduled in that sort of caste system, that sort of hierarchy. He was outside of that system. That's how low his particular position was. And it meant that he was denied any real opportunities, and would not even be able to mingle in mainstream society. So he remembers his position, and I really can't imagine having a system whereby it was often defined to begin with by your work. So you had to do the same job as your parents and their parents and their parents. That obviously defined who you would marry, defined whether you got an education or not, and the quality of that education, if you were lucky to have one. It defined all kinds of things. And of course, we have our social hierarchies in all parts of the world, actually. We have class in this country. We also have the system of racial inequality as well. We've been hearing a lot about that over the last few months. So these are all things that can define one's experience, that can deny opportunities, and actually pits people against each other as well. The difference with the caste system is that it's rooted in religion, and a religion that the view is, if you follow and just obey your position, then in the next lifetime you'll be in a better position, better place. So, and actually, if you try and overcome that position, break out of it, certainly in those days, it would be punished. And that's actually carried on till, well, it's still carrying on in different ways. Many aspects of the caste system, some of the worst aspects have been made illegal, but it still really is part of the fabric of the social system in India. So it still deprives many millions of people of their full opportunities. So Nidhi is in this situation. And his job was that of a manual scavenger. So that is where his job was to take the human waste away from the village to the outskirts. And, you know, this story is 2,500, 600 years ago. So I thought, not knowing that this kind of job would happen these days. And it was only when I worked briefly with Akasha Mitra, actually, in a project that funds projects in India. And I met a man there who was leading a project of women who were manual scavengers. So that meant they carried baskets of waste from dry latrines to the outskirts. And it was very moving. I was so moved and shocked as well by what I saw. But it was also very uplifting, because this project was really giving women the freedom to break out of this work, because this work really, I mean, they were ashamed of this work that they were doing, many of them, and also they were shunned by their own families. You know, that's how deep that kind of shame was, and yet they were dependent on it. So this project was really encouraging them to sort of really value themselves and say, no, this is not work for me. This is not a dignified work, and I'm worthy of more than this. And I remember seeing films and videos where they would take their baskets and burn their baskets and really, you know, have this sort of uproarious sort of, you know, joy and laughter. And then they were given the skills to have decent work, which was, I think, sewing on this occasion, sewing clothes for others. So yeah, it still exists. It still exists, this kind of work. So Nidhi was a manual scavenger. And he had to basically, you know, as he was lying there, he remembered, you know, his work. And he also knew that the route that he normally takes would, he normally would sort of come home early hours of the morning, really to avoid as many people as possible. And he realized that would be really difficult if the Buddha was coming, because people would start arriving in the place, in the town, and more and more people would be wanting to see the Buddha. And how was he going to avoid all those people? He knew that if his very presence to the crowds, the Buddha would be punished. And, you know, so he went from this joy, this imagining his freedom, imagining living a life that the Buddha promised, in a way, from all the things he'd heard, a life of love, a life of dignity, a life of freedom. He went from that to fear and dread. It's almost like the shutters came down, you know, really rapidly, you know, on him. And this is interesting, I think, in terms of, like, you know, how we relate to it or not. You may really relate to this situation. But I was thinking that it works on all levels, this kind of thing. Obviously, we're talking about a very challenging, oppressive social situation here and how it impacts. But I was thinking that sense of the shutters coming down, that time, I've seen this on retreat many times, or when I've been working with people, that, you know, people have this opening to possibility, this seeing for themselves, you know, the vision of how their lives can be, and suddenly the shutters come down. Suddenly, sometimes it's sudden, sometimes it's not, but the shutters can come down when you remember really what one's circumstances or situation or background or history is. So this is not, you know, this is something I think we probably all can relate to. That sense of, there's something about me that's not worthy, that's not good enough, that's not able to follow this path that actually I'm also deeply attracted to, that also is deeply promising. So I find this really interesting, what are the shutters that can come down for us as well when we start imagining what's possible for us. So this is what's happening to Nidhi. He's got this sense of possibility, but it's his social situation in this case, a system in this case that absolutely says no to him. At least that's what he thinks, and he knows from all the experiences that he's had. So, yes, Nidhi and his situation. Yes, we sometimes reject aspects of ourselves that stop us from going forward. So how do we work with this? What does Nidhi do in this case? Well, I was thinking that one of the things that happens is when we decide I can't do that, even though I really want to, we often default to our habitual, familiar sort of modes, our habitual, familiar, places of not even comfort. In Nidhi's case, it's definitely not comfort, but it's definitely familiar. He knows how he should navigate, the world of manual scavenging, and he knows how to navigate, his position in the caste system, even though it's deeply painful and damaging every single day of his life. So he defaults to survival. His very thinking is, how should I get free of this? What do I do? How do I avoid the Buddha? I don't want to see the Buddha or any of his followers. So he decides that the best thing he's going to do, all he can do really, is to find a different route. So he tries to avoid the sort of main areas and also go much earlier, so that he avoids the sort of crowds as they start building up. So that's what he does. He gets ready and, gets his basket, and he goes out. And what's interesting is that he basically, soon his basket begins to feel quite heavy. And maybe it's the knowledge of what's about to happen. I don't know. Maybe it's the knowledge of the Buddha coming. Maybe it's something else. But his basket feels heavier than normal. But he does know the routes he's going to take. So he basically goes down all the darkest of streets, the darkest of streets where he thinks no one's going to go down. So he's collected his waste and he starts making his route back home. And he's going down one of these dark streets, and but in front of him, just in a flash, he sees the hem of a golden robe. But then it passes, and he thinks he's seeing things. So he sort of dismisses it from his mind, and he carries on. Then he goes down another dark street, and he then sees another flash and footsteps, this time just walking away. And he's beginning to get nervous now. The basket's heavy on his head. He's beginning to get nervous. The sweat, he's already been working for hours already. He's really tired, but the sweat's beginning to pour down, his face. He knows he needs to get away. He's beginning to think, gosh, maybe some of the followers are around already. Who are these? What is these images I'm seeing? Of course, you might have guessed that, the Buddha is in pursuit of Nidhi. Whilst he is desperately trying to escape the Buddha is coming towards Nidhi. And he's seen Nidhi, apparently, according to the story, in his divine eye, his faculty. He's seen Nidhi. So Nidhi goes down another street, another flash. This time, he sees more of the robe. And this is it now. He's getting very nervous. He really thinks he needs to get away from this, from whoever this is or whoever these people are that he's seeing. He needs to get away from this. So he goes down a couple of streets and starts running. Really, the basket is heavy on his head. The sweat's pouring down him, but he starts picking up a pace and running because, he can't be caught anywhere near any of the followers or even any of the people going to see the Buddha. Otherwise, it could mean death for him at that time. So he starts running, and he goes down one street, and he can't actually see the way out of this street. What you could say is an alleyway, like a cul-de-sac he's gone down. And it's a long street, so he carries on running, and then he hears footsteps behind him, and he daren't look back. So now you can imagine now his heart is beating, the basket's even heavier. He doesn't want to look back. He hears footsteps behind him. He's carrying on running, but the more he runs, the footsteps don't seem to be abating. They're not running, they're just walking very steadily. And then finally, he takes a quick just glance, and there it's like the whole alleyway, the whole dark street has been lit up. The whole space is now lit with the presence of the Buddha. And people would say that, as I said before, that the Buddha was like the sun shining and bursting the dark clouds. And that's what it was like. And it terrifies Nidhi. It absolutely terrifies. He starts running even more, but then he falls and stumbles. The basket goes everywhere, and he's just cowering with terror and deep shame. I could start the story there, but I'll carry on because I remember reading this bit of the story, and I'm like, oh my goodness, what's going to happen? What's going to happen at this point? Nidhi just cowers, actually. And, it's the worst thing. It's the worst thing that could have happened in his mind to him, is that in the presence of the most noble person, the purest person, the most skillful, loving, wise, in his mind, high person, high status person, the worst thing that could have happened is that he falls to his feet with his basket everywhere and nowhere to hide. So he doesn't move. But the Buddha comes towards him, and he says, "Please stand, Nidhi." So actually that just confuses Nidhi. So although he's terrified and he's cowering, he's like, "Nidhi, how does he even know my name?" But he doesn't move, he just stays there. So the Buddha says again, "Please stand, Nidhi." And of course he's what's the word, obedient. He's learned obedience, and so he knows he has to stand. So he stands and he doesn't look at the Buddha. His eyes are downcast, although he feels the energy of the Buddha. When people will talk about that, it's like this grey energy. He feels it, but he does not dare to look at the Buddha. And the Buddha then just says to him, "What's in your heart?" So he says, "Fear, my Lord. Fear is in my heart." So the Buddha says, why is that? And he says, "Because I've been cast out. I've been cast out, I'm an outcast, and my presence, my very presence, will defile the Blessed One." So I think this is really powerful. I mean, Nidhi knows, what situation he's in. And he knows his social situation, he knows the situation, he knows what it means in terms of their interaction. And it's also interesting that the Buddha asks him what's in his heart, and the Nidhi is able to name fear. So in a sense, I think that's really interesting. I think what he's kind of saying is, this is the only way I can relate right now. You're high, I'm low. As a result, I know what normally happens in that situation when I encounter people, even anyone like you, but not even like you, but anyone that's high. I know what normally would happen to me. So there's fear. So this is very interesting. This is very much around our conditions. Right now, his social conditions and the circumstances he's been born into, and the societal expectations and norms and sort of sanctions are impacting deeply on his ability to even look at the Buddha. So he's governed right now by his social conditions. And again, we can think, gosh, that is a bit, it feels to us, depending on your situation, it might feel an extreme situation. But it's not in many ways. We are all governed by our social situations to the extent that we're not aware of them, and to the extent that we've not chosen otherwise. So I always think, we've got our families that we're born into, we have our education, religion, culture, race, genders, all kinds of things that's just part of what we're born into. And it's like the waters we're swimming in. So we're absorbing things from this all of the time. And yet we don't have to be defined by them, but the society often will define us. It's a really challenging thing, like, well, who am I beyond my conditions? And it's not that all conditions are bad, of course. I think sometimes we can have really positive conditions that we're born into. But even those conditions we have to be aware of, so that we're not taking them for granted. You might be, born into a family where people value communication or the arts. I was thinking the other day that many of my family that I was born into, they were gardeners. They're really in touch with the earth. And I've only just started trying that out. But I was thinking, actually, it's in my sort of cultures, in my history, my family background particularly. And, just really, it's probably maybe something of that has been passed on. So we can learn from our positive conditions and grow from our positive conditions. But it's still important to be aware of them and that how they've impacted on us. And of course, our challenging conditions as well. Sometimes often our behaviours governed by our challenging conditions, but we're not aware of it. Or we think it's normal. We just think that's just how I am. And but is it? This is a question, is it? What the Buddha stands for is someone who's free of conditions, free of conditioning and negative the conditioning, and then the biases and prejudices that come from those set of conditions. That's what the Buddha stands for. In a way, that's what Nidhi is facing now, that somebody who's free of conditions and his own experience, which is so governed by restrictive and oppressive set of conditions. So I don't know. I think the practice for me is often, well, what are my conditions? How are they impacting on my behaviour? And are they helpful? Are they helping me to connect more with myself and others? Are they helping me be clear about what's skillful, what's non-skillful, positive or negative? Are they helping me grow or not? That's often that's the practice. And also, I often, in terms of empathizing with others, we can't really empathize fully with others until we really also see their conditions and see that they're not defined by their conditions either. I remember going to South Africa a few times, and to Cape Town specifically. And Cape Town's a very beautiful place. I mean, it's surrounded by mountains and the ocean. It's really very beautiful. And it's also, I found it deeply disturbing, the trip that I had there, because many of the outside of this beautiful, city sort of centre, very, very wide estates and all these really wonderful areas. Outside of that are the sort of informal settlements and the townships, and many of the people that lived in the city centre were forcibly removed through the system that they had, the apartheid system, to the outskirts, to the townships. So cast out as well. I was pretty shocked by those conditions, because although I knew about them, seeing them really brought it home to me, how our conditions can impact on us. There I saw, corrugated iron hut upon corrugated iron hut on a bed of sand, so that when it was hot, it was just really boiling, and when it was rain, they would get flooded. And hundreds, thousands of them. Nothing could really grow. So no natural, spaces that you would normally sort of have. And and a ring. Some of them had a ring of sort of porta cabin toilets for people to use. And I have to say, I was mentoring some of the activists and people that I was with. And I remember after a while when I was there saying to one of them, I don't actually know how I would have become in this set of conditions. And she sort of had tears in her eyes, and she thanked me for saying that. And I afterwards I thought, I wonder why she's thanked me for saying that. And I think it was just a recognition, really, that we don't know how we would be in another person's shoes. We can't say. I hope I would be somebody that would, want to fight for my freedom and for others' freedom. I hope that I'd somebody who'd really still connect to other people. But we don't really know. So, that really brought it home to me how important our conditions are, firstly, and how to not take positive conditions for granted that we have, and also how it's so important to work with negative conditions, challenging conditions, because they do have a deep effect on us and limit what's possible for us in terms of growth, in terms of love. So this is Nidhi's situation. He's encountered the Buddha. The Buddha has said to him, what's in your heart? And he says, fear, my Lord. And it's fear because he knows the weight of his conditions and he can't see a way out at this point. So I will, just before the break, tell you what the Buddha then says to him. So the Buddha takes this in, what Nidhi says. He would have known it anyway. So this is what the Buddha says. I'm going to read it for you. He says, my Dharma is like clean water. It can wash away the defilements away from anyone and anything. My Dharma, this is the teachings, is like fire, and it can burn away all ignorance. My Dharma is like the ocean, which can hold anything in it. Among the Sangha, among the community of spiritual practitioners, there is no distinction between caste, high or low, or better or worse. All such distinctions are the merest of illusion. Our very bodies are illusions, and with wisdom alone, we can learn to see beyond them. Free yourself, Nidhi, and come with me. So those are the Buddha's words. I wonder what impact they had on Nidhi. And we're going to go to, let's go to maybe a break now, and we'll come back after the break and I'll just complete the story, maybe draw out one or two more reflections, and then we'll think of questions as well. So please do think of the questions that you'd like to ask myself and Akashi Mitra. Akashi Mitra's worked in India, so he's got current experience of that situation. So we're fortunate to have him this evening. But also, what are the teachings? What are the reflections that have been drawn out for you? Conditionality, the things arise in dependence upon conditions and cease when those conditions cease. So what are the, we arise in dependence on our conditions. And if we change our conditions, our experience changes. And Buddhism and the Buddha represents being beyond those conditions. But we can only be beyond them when we understand those conditions. So we can explore that a bit more, but also thinking a bit about rejection. What happens to us with rejection? How does that impact on us? And how do we work with that? Do we reject aspects of ourselves? And then again, how does that play out in our Dharma lives, in our spiritual lives, in our lives? as well. So yeah, we'll come back, we'll hear a bit more conclusion of the Nidhi story, and yeah, we'll be ready for questions. So thank you. I'll hand back to, actually, do I hand back at this point, or we'll just go to the break? Thank you. 5 minutes break. Okay, so coming back, thank you, team there. So, so yes, picking up the story of Nidhi, he's encountered the Buddha. The Buddha's given him this teaching about the Dharma. I'll say it again because I think it's a really, well, this is where Nidhi's route out of his situation starts happening. So my Dharma is like clean water. It can wash away the defilements away from anyone and anything. My Dharma is like fire, and it can burn away all ignorance. My Dharma is like the ocean, and it can hold anything. Among the Sangha, there is no distinction between caste or class, high or low, better or worse. All such distinctions are the merest of illusions. Our very bodies are illusions. And with wisdom alone will we learn to see beyond them. Free yourself, Nidhi. Free yourself from ignorance and come with me. So a very direct personal invitation to Nidhi there. And I think it's a very beautiful, those words. So the power, what he's doing really, I mean, he's just conveying the power of the Dharma, the power of the teachings. In a way, Nidhi already knows the presence of the Buddha. He knows the impact that the Buddha is already having just in being there, like a light, like this great, warm, deep light, like an expanse of sky that suddenly opened up. So Nidhi already has that experience. But what the Buddha's doing there is saying, it's the teachings that will free you. Practicing the teachings will give you the power that you need to let go of these social conditions and how that's impacted on you. And so when he says the Dharma is like clean water, it can wash away defilements. Really, remember Nidhi's fallen. He's fallen with his basket. You know, he's feeling defiled, isn't he? You know, because of that. So he's saying, don't worry about that in a sense. The Dharma is really what will clean away. This is just matter here. Really, the real defilements is actually within, and the Dharma can clear away that, can purify that. And then he says, it's like fire, and it can burn away all ignorance. So that's Nidhi's ignorance. That's other people's ignorance. And Nidhi would have seen a lot of ignorance. He would have seen a lot of things that he just knows were not true. And yet, you know, were still having an impact on him. You know, he knows that he knows on some level that he's worthy, is worth something. But yeah, that's not how he would have seen. And he knows that's not true. And yet, you know, he knows it's ignorance, but what can you do about that? You know, so he's saying, the Buddha's saying, the Dharma is what actually reduces all ignorance, the truth, effectively. And then he says that this is what I particularly like, the Dharma is like the ocean, it can hold anything. So I wonder how he would have heard that. For me, if I'm trying to step into his shoes, I would have heard that, like, no matter what I've been through, no matter what's happened in my life, no matter what my current situation is, the teachings can apply to it. So I was asking you before the break around, well, what do we reject aspects of ourselves or our lives or our background, or, you know, do we reject things about ourselves? Do we not want to acknowledge things? And well, in a way, that's part of practicing, part of going deeper in practice, is to come into more relationship with those aspects of oneself, the things that we think are not lovable, the things that make us feel that we can't, you know, have beauty, love, freedom in our lives. It's coming into relationship with that, and then applying the Dharma, applying the teachings to that, to those aspects of ourselves, and seeing them change, seeing the transformation. The Dharma can hold anything. There's nothing outside of our experience that we can't bring to the Dharma. That's what the Buddha is saying here. And then really importantly, the Buddha's not just saying to him, oh, you know, just practice individually and, you know, and don't worry about all this. Don't worry about all the social situation. He's not saying that. He actually tells Nidhi something he needs to hear. Because Nidhi needs to know that if, okay, the Dharma might be this pure set of teachings that he can apply to his life, but what's the context is he going to do that in? He needs the context. He needs other practitioners. He needs to learn from others. He knows that. And not just the Buddha, of course. So the Buddha tells him there are no distinctions in the Sangha between caste or class. You could have added, in these days would have said race. There's no distinction, as in there's no hierarchy. He does not accept hierarchy in the spiritual community based on those social set of conditions. There might be a hierarchy based on understanding, based on wisdom, based on love, but it's not an oppressive hierarchy. It's a hierarchy which you just recognize other people might be a bit ahead of the path and actually can help you, discover and fulfill your own potential. So he's not saying that, but he's saying that social hierarchy, the one that's based on power, the one that's oppressive, he is not accepting that in his Sangha, in his spiritual community. Now, I think Nidhi would have needed to really hear those words for him to feel able to follow the Buddha, because he suffered from those things. So even, I was thinking about this, like in reality, I wonder how true that was, I was thinking. But actually in the Buddha's day, we know there were many, many enlightened beings. And part of enlightenment is being free of conditions and the conditioning and the bias and prejudices of those conditionings. So the Buddha would have had people that were from the top rung of that ladder, that social hierarchy. He would have had Brahmins in his community, and their practice would have had to have been to work with and see the suffering in their superiority. And Nidhi naturally would have had to work with his sense of inferiority. And if your practice is effective, then those sort of way you relate to yourself and others gradually dissolve, gradually transform, and then you are relating to the qualities of another, their very being, their presence, and the value of their lives. That's what you're relating to. So the Buddha sort of marked that. That's what my Sangha is. Now, that's not to say people were, not everybody was enlightened. So I can imagine that there still were some issues. But in a way, the culture, the general culture, and certainly the aspiration and the intention of people was very clear around that, certainly the intention of the Buddha. And he set that example. He was a great exemplar of someone who would not relate on that basis, and certainly encourage people not to. And in a way, if you were, then you were, at that point that you were doing that, you're not part of the spiritual community. So we all have biases and prejudices. They come from our conditioning, and the practice is just to be in relationship to that and to recognize the suffering in that and recognize how it sort of shuts us off from ourselves and shuts us off from others. So that's and what else would you get from the story? So he also says, oh yes, it's an illusion. It's not really how things are. Even our very bodies are not really how things are. So we think of ourselves also as like, well, we're our bodies, aren't we? But the Buddha's saying, even that's an illusion. We are more too than our bodies. We're more than our social conditions, our conditioning. We're also more than our bodies. But only wisdom will you enable to see that. It's not enough to know it intellectually. We have to live it. We have to then see it and then experience ourselves in the world quite differently. And that's where freedom beckons us. So just to conclude, really, the Nidhi did become a great teacher. He became enlightened, to become a great teacher, and I imagine was able to reach so many people. And if people knew the background that he came with, they would have been drawn to Nidhi. I'm sure those also like him would have been drawn to him, but also the respect he would have had from so many, all the Sangha would have been a great. Anyone that becomes enlightened, really free of the conditions, is worthy of respect. And it was also really radical what the Buddha did in not allowing caste to manifest, to take root in his Sangha. Hugely radical. Again, really sets us, I think, a real example of how we can be as a Sangha, how we can, be a spiritual community that really practices in this way, to know our conditions and know the limits and barriers that our conditioning creates, and know that they will create biases and prejudices that sets us apart from others, but also practice knowing that that's an illusion. And how do we get beneath that? How do we see beyond that? How do we come into a relationship with who we truly are, not just what we've been born in, the waters that we've been born in? So now we have, in part of our movement in India, our movement in India is largely made up of the Dalit community, people with similar backgrounds to our character in the story, Nidhi. And as I said, Akasha Mitra works in a project that supports some of those communities. And it's a thriving community. It's a thriving community. It makes up most of the Buddhists in India. So even though Buddhism died out in India, it's the Dalit community who've really taken up Buddhism as a practice to free themselves from their social conditions, free themselves from the conditions of mind, the illusions that we create in our minds, and actually at the same time create good conditions for people so that they can practice, so that we can grow. Because we do need good conditions to grow. We're very much like plants and flowers. We sort of need the soil to be a positive one, so that we can flourish, and we can create those. We can create those conditions, positive conditions for ourselves, freeing ourselves from negative conditions, and understanding that core teaching that all things arise in dependence upon conditions and cease when those conditions cease. So that's the story of Nidhi, the enlightened, the person who was rejected from all aspects of society, who became enlightened, who found liberation and was able to show the way for many, many people. So I'm going to come back to Akasha Mitra, and please do put your questions in the box, so in the chat box, so that Akasha Mitra and I can respond to them. How does this story resonate for you? What are the questions that you have? Be really interested to hear. Thank you. I think it was over to you, Akasha Mitra, or the chat box.
Again.
Over to you or the chat box.
Okay. So am I? Yeah. Okay. Great. Okay. Sorry, we've slight kind of technical things here. It's all going well, but it's hard to know who's on. And so yeah, great. Okay. Firstly, I just want to say thank you so much, Suryagupta. A beautiful, beautiful story, but wonderfully told as well. I thought you brought that to life beautifully. I find that so moving. I was actually sort of welling up at points. I mean, it's such a moving story, so kind of so poignant and so powerful. So thank you so much for sharing that with us. Yeah, absolutely wonderful. And yeah, so we've got some time now for questions, and Suryagupta and myself will answer any questions that you have. So you can put those in the chat box. And are there any questions that have come in so far, Rita, as well? Yeah.
So we have a question from Brian,
Mm-hmm.
who says, what happens if you change the conditions, but you're still acting as if they were there? So it's almost like an autopilot fear reaction, because there were consequences of similar causes in the past. Okay, so Brian's asking a question, which is, what happens if you change the conditions, but you're acting as if those conditions are already there? So, for example, you might have a sort of habitual fear response to something. That's a very, very good question, Brian. Yeah, thank you for that.
I mean, what it puts me in mind of is, you know, we have this way of explaining conditionality. You know, that things fall away when those conditions cease, and that can. It's a very, very profound teaching, and in a way, to actually really understand that and get to that, you have to look at it in a bit more depth, and you have to sort of examine it and think about what that really means. And I think how that actually plays out in our lives can be complex sometimes. And I think if, for example, we have a long-standing habit, then there can be that's a sort of volitional thing, and there can be a what's the word? Sometimes that can take time to die away. You know, we can see that we need to change, or sometimes even we can change significantly, but that habit might still be there. You know, if we've responded to something in a certain way, and we've done that for years and years and years and years, it's not always possible to just change like that. You know, change is a process and it takes time. I mean, what comes to mind for me is, you know, there's a teaching of the wheel and the spiral. So some of you will be familiar with this teaching, that in Buddhism we talk about the wheel and the spiral. So if we're just going round and round and round in our life, responding and reacting in the way that we always have done, you could say that we're on the wheel. You know, we just keep finding ourselves in the same place again and again and again. But with awareness and with knowing that we need to change and knowing what we need to do, we can go from the wheel to the spiral. But what's interesting about that is that a spiral is not a ladder. You know, on a spiral, you still go round and round to an extent, but you're refining each time you go round, and you're ascending each time you go round. So sometimes it's not possible to change all at once. It takes time. Would you add anything to that, Suryagupta?
Yeah. So yes, sometimes when you say you change your conditions, Brian, you're sort of saying, well, I've taken myself out of something that I knew wasn't helpful to me, and now I'm in a new situation. So, but why am I still reacting in the way I did in the old situation? And it's just as the Akasha Mitra says, that our habits become quite ingrained, and they set off a sort of automatic responses often, you know, in our bodies and our minds. So we have something that resonates or that reminds us of the previous set of conditions, and we'll respond in that way. But the teaching that Akasha Mitra's just outlined there, that is very much like, actually, the more awareness you have, even over how you get into the habitual response, is a more possible it is for you to be free of it. I would say metta, loving kindness, and mindfulness, those practices are really important, because sometimes we get frustrated with ourselves. Sometimes we think, how comes I'm here again? I thought I'd changed. Why am I still responding like that? And we need two things. We need the loving kindness to ourselves to kind of go, it was a long habit. It was a difficult set of conditions. It's become quite ingrained. It's going to take me time. So you can have that patience and kindness to not give yourself the hard time, because that's just going to make it worse. So that's where metta comes in. And then mindfulness is spotting the opportunities for change. And those opportunities for change might be quite small, but we take them when we're aware of them. Think, oh, this is where I can start breaking or dismantling that habit. And we do it bit by bit by bit by bit. And then one day we might just recognize, oh, I didn't react like that anymore. But we have to know how we react, why we react, you know, all the various triggers. We have to be kind to ourselves when we do. And then from there, we find ways out of it.
Yeah, thank you, Suryagupta. I think that's really well put as well. I think trust is really important as well. Sort of trust and faith, I find, is trusting that things will change, but that it takes time. You know, it reminds me of, there's a verse from an ancient Buddhist text called the Dhammapada, where it says, let the wise person remove impurities from themselves, like the silversmith removes impurities from the silver, little after little, one after one. And I think that's that's how we need to approach things. Yeah, that it takes time and it's a gradual process. Yeah. Okay. So let's see if there's any other questions.
Yeah, so we have a question from Oliver asking that given the caste system at the time, had the Buddha come from a low class or low caste, do you think people would have listened to him and looked to him as much as they did?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, isn't it? I mean, in a sense...
Do you want to say what the question is?
Sorry, yeah, I'll say what the question is. Sorry, yeah. So the question was from Oliver, and Oliver said, given the caste system in India at the time, do we think that if the Buddha had come from a low caste background, that people would have listened to him? I wonder actually whether you want to start us off this time, Suryagupta.
Yeah, that's a really interesting observation. I don't know. I mean, in a way, some of that. So I think he probably would have had lots of barriers. He would have had lots of barriers in leading this homeless life that he led, because he left home, wandered, sort of had to find his way basically. So I imagine he would have had a lot more barriers there, a lot more challenges. So that might have impacted on things. But say he does become enlightened, well, there's a power to enlightenment. And I can imagine that even if people would have been, sort of biased against him, he still would have been enlightened. He still would have been free. So those people who wanted that would have still gone to him. Because even the Buddha as he was, and he came from a fairly privileged background, not everybody thought he was, great or amazing. Not because they didn't recognize, because that's how they saw him. They had their filters. They weren't receptive to him. So not everybody who met the Buddha followed the Buddha. And he was criticized for some of his actions. He was certainly criticized for not recognizing the caste system. He was criticized for admitting women to the homeless life. So yes, I think that even if he'd come from a low caste background, he would have had probably more challenges on the journey. But as an enlightened being, those people who wanted to be free would have still followed him. And those who were going to be critical would have been critical anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I think you drew that out really, really, really well in the story, Suryagupta, as well, where you were just talking about the presence of the Buddha. That in a sense, his through his beliefs, thank you. I've been told to look at the camera. So, that the thing about the Buddha just being such a presence and so radiant, yes. I mean, I think you brought that out really beautifully in the story. It reminds me a bit as well of the story of when the Buddha started to teach after his enlightenment, that he finds his old disciples and he goes back to see them, and his disciples are waiting there for him, and they decide that they're not going to give him the time of day, basically, because he stopped following these ascetic practices, and they say, oh, he turned his back on these practices, and here comes Gautama, but we won't entertain him, we won't speak to him. And as he gets closer, they just can't help themselves. He's radiant, he's beautiful, and he walks towards them, and they almost against their own better wishes, they make him a seat, and they sit down and they listen to him. And I think he would have just been such a presence, and those people who were receptive, they would have seen that, and they would have responded to him. Yeah.
And the key thing here as well is that the Buddha would not have related to himself as the Buddha that he was. He didn't relate to himself as a privileged person. Those distinctions had gone, and the same would have happened whatever background he would have come from. Those distinctions would have gone. So he was just, he would not have had that sort of way of, he had a whole different way of experiencing, the world and others, and all distinctions would have gone. So I think it's hard we can't really put ourselves in the Buddha's mindset, actually, because he had a whole different level of consciousness. But we can imagine that people would have had their same biases that they normally have in relation to him. But he was a free being. So whatever position he would have come from, and yeah, people would have been open to that, those who wanted to be.
Great. Thank you, Suryagupta. Yeah, so are there we've probably got time for one more question, I think. Yeah, let's.
So there's a question from Adrienne, and she's asking, when you say it's important to work with negative conditions, what is the best way to do that? Do you mean your physical conditions, like where you work, live, etc.?
So the question is from Adrienne, and she's asking, when you say that we need to work with negative conditions, what do you mean exactly? So do you mean the physical conditions? Do you mean the conditions of your life? Do you mean you yourself, your internal conditions? So what is it that we're talking about there?
All of the above. All of the above. Whatever you find is affecting you sort of negatively, really. Anything that you feel is making you despondent, upset, fearful, whatever the negative emotion is, that is a condition. That's something that's happening in your experience. So it could be internal. It could just be a habit that you've got into. It could be the way you perceive something. It could be a job. There's whatever your situation is, really. Now, when I say work with it, it doesn't mean you get rid of it. It doesn't mean you think it's not valuable in other ways. It might be, actually. It really depends. So sometimes we can think, oh God, I can't stand, this job or this environment. I've had that. I remember, in fact, really, I was born in East London, and I remember from a young age going, I hate this area. I want to get out of this area. And there were lots of things that I found really difficult about it, and I acknowledged the impact they had on me. But in a way, it was interesting that I've ended up living in the East End of London and enjoying it now. So it's almost like I had to understand what it was about the set of conditions that were having that impact. And then I had to then think, okay, how much of it is the set of conditions, the external, and how much of it is the way I'm relating to it? So, and then I discovered it was a bit of both, actually. It was a bit of how I was relating to it, and there were some things about those particular set of conditions that I was finding hard as well, that I didn't like. So, and I didn't think were helpful. So it was a real combination. And often what we find that things are often a combination of how we relate to it and the situation itself. So we have to work on both, really. Sometimes it means that we've got to change the conditions. I did take myself out for a few years and had a completely different environment, and then was able to come back differently and relate to it differently, for example. So sometimes we have to change the conditions, and other times we have to just change ourselves in relationship to the conditions.
Yeah, I think that's so true, Suryagupta. I'm also struck by the relationship between those two things as well. So my experience, certainly, and I think this is a universal experience, is that we can think we need to change our external conditions, but actually when we change ourselves, our external conditions start to change. And I mean that objectively. The conditions of our lives actually start to change. Sometimes certain things happen around you, certain opportunities present themselves, and so on. The other thing that struck me as well from the story and from the question, I think it relates to the question, is that we don't do that on our own. Sometimes actually we need somehow to see that embodied. Or we need somebody to give us permission to do that. So in Nidhi's case, it's the Buddha. But it's actually, sometimes we can't see what we need for ourselves. We need to see the possibility embodied by somebody else, or we need to find circumstances or a situation that is inspiring, that somehow sort of teaches us what we need to do. We can't always sort of work it out for ourselves on our own.
No.
And I think that's why community and Sangha is so important.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the things that struck me in the story that you were saying, Suryagupta, is that often we can't see our own potential. It's like people, the Buddha relates to Nidhi on the basis of his potential, just as last week the Buddha was relating to Kisagotami on the basis of her potential. Often we can't see our own potential. We need somebody almost to sort of tell us what our potential is, Yeah.
And we don't know what it's like as well when we're not relating to our conditions in our habitual way. So it sometimes that also stops. So we need a bit of imagination, or we need to see other people, like, okay, who am I without my fear? Who am I without my nervousness, or whatever it is? We need to see like people really positive, don't we? Fearless, to kind of know that it's even possible to be like that.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Yeah. Okay, great. So thanks for all your questions. Really, really good to explore the story from the perspective of your questions. So we're coming towards the end of the evening. So I just want to say thanks once again to Suryagupta for taking the time to share that story with us and for sharing that so fully and so beautifully. So really, really appreciate that. Thank you, Suryagupta. Yeah, and thank you to the tech team that always make these evenings possible. So thanks to all of you. Yeah. So in a moment, we're going to finish with doing the transference of merit and self-surrender. But before we do that, I just want to say a little bit about how you can support the LBC if you want to. So one of the core sort of values of Buddhism is generosity, and the center runs on generosity. All of us give our time for free because we love the center, we love the Sangha, and because we want to make these teachings available to as many people as possible. So I found it very, very moving this evening, hearing the story of Nidhi and how the Buddha sort of gives him the gift of his own potential. And that's what the Buddha's teachings do, and that's what the Dharma does. And that's what we're trying to do here, is have as many people access those teachings as possible so that they can reach their full potential. And that's certainly been my experience, is that my life has changed beyond belief since I've come to the Dharma, come to the Buddha's teachings. And if you're able to support the work that we do here, in a sense, what you're doing is you're gifting that to somebody else. So if you support the center, for example, through a monthly donation, or just by giving, say, £10 for the class this evening, it's wonderful to think that by doing that, what you're doing is giving the gift of potential to somebody in the future that you may never even meet. I often find it wonderful to think that when I give to the center myself, that actually what I'm doing is I'm giving a gift in the future to help somebody to reach their own potential. And I may never meet that person, I may never come across them, but I know that that's what's happening. So it'd be wonderful if you can support the center. As I said, you could give a monthly donation, or you could just give a one-off this evening. But it's that we need money basically to do what we do here. So yeah, thank you. And thank you for all the people that are supporting us financially as well. Lots and lots of people that have been giving to support the center while we're doing these online activities. So thank you. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to finish with the transference of merit and self-surrender. So we'll do that in call and response. So try joining in at home. I'll say a line and then you can say a line. And we'll do that. And then when we've done that, that will be the end of the evening. Okay. So transference of merit and self-surrender. May the merit gained in my acting thus go to the alleviation of the suffering of all beings. My personality throughout my existences, my possessions, and my merit in all three ways. I give up without regard to myself for the benefit of all beings. Just as the earth and other elements are serviceable in many ways to the infinite number of beings inhabiting limitless space. So may I become that which maintains all beings, situated throughout space, so long as all have not attained to peace. So thank you everyone and good night.